Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give people a few minutes to roll in. But as you join, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, feel free to share your name, if there's an organization you're affiliated with, and where you're joining from. Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Just going to keep giving a few minutes for people to roll in. And yeah, feel free to share your name, your organization, and where you're joining from. Thanks for being here. All right, well, we'll get going. So, yeah, as you're coming in, feel free to share your name, organization, and where you're joining from in the chat. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. So, if you're not familiar with the Northwest Energy Coalition, we are an alliance of over 100 environmental, civil, and human service organizations, utilities, and businesses spanning Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia. And our mission is to advance clean, equitable, and affordable energy policies by leveraging our analytical expertise and convening a broad alliance of people and organizations. So, our agenda this morning, we're here to talk about the ninth power plan. So, I'm going to go over some brief webinar reminders, and then we're going to get a quick overview of the timeline for the draft plan. We're going to hear from our panelists. They're going to introduce themselves and ground us in why this plan matters. And then we're going to run through an overview of the draft plan and our focus areas. We'll review the opportunities to engage in the draft plan comment process, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&As. So just a few reminders as you join us on our webinar, please keep yourselves on mute throughout the webinar so we don't have any background noise. And we're going to ask that we keep all questions in the chat. So as our presenters are speaking, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we're going to save all of those for the end for our Q&A session. And just a reminder that our coalition is made up of a diverse perspectives and identities, so please be mindful of respecting this diversity with your questions and comments throughout the webinar. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ben to give us a little bit of background on the power plan.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you are. I see in the chat that we have people from a good spectrum of the Northwest. So thanks for joining us. I'm the interim state and regional policy director for the coalition. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about the Northwest Power Plan. We are unique in that our region has some of the best planning that happens of any regions in the country. And a lot of that is driven by this big overarching Bonneville power system, federal hydro system that sets the kind of baseline, the foundation, and then for our region, and then our other utilities integrate. So the power plan is very important to bring forward a plan, a comprehensive plan for a region that is just interconnected by the nature of our hydro and transmission system. The plan looks ahead 20 years, as you can see on the slide, and it assesses how do we make sure we have an adequate, reliable system while also mitigating and minimizing the impacts to fish and wildlife. If any plan for 20 years is going to be uncertain, so there's an action plan in the first 6 years that gives a little bit more direction to Bonneville and regional utilities of what they should do to help create this system. Like I said, we forecast needs, resources, new options, and try to find the best mix of a portfolio of actions going forward, and then develop some recommendations for Bonneville and other utilities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is just a quick visual of what the footprint of this plan, what it covers. So this is roughly the Bonneville, the Columbia River Basin, including the Snake River, and it's roughly the Bonneville power system. You see it extends up into Canada, and that's really the hydro system, the Columbia River system that extends up there, not necessarily our energy system. So it includes a little bit Eastern Washington. So that's fine, no worries. Next thing, this is the process. So we gave our first webinar on June 9th, and there's a link there, and we'll also put that in the chat. And that gives a little bit higher level background of what the ninth power plan looks like. We're here following the release of a draft plan that is now available for public comment. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what's in that draft plan and what kind of comments people might want to make. And then that comment period goes into the 16th. There will be there's a portal so you can do online comments, but there'll also be some in-person hearings that we really encourage people to attend. There'll be a spread around the region. These places are our best understanding right now of the locations, but we don't have the dates yet. We're waiting for the Power Council to release those, and once they do, you'll hear from us promptly so we can start arranging um, people to turn out and give some in-person comments. There's two Power Council meetings already scheduled. You see those, another opportunity for public comment. And then all this wraps up in October, and we'll see a final plan. So that's our timeline. We got about 2 months to drive a public comment period. All right, and now I'm on to my next person, which I get to introduce. Sorry. So thanks, folks. Real quickly, we're going to go through our panelists and just give you all a little perspective on from kind of four different perspectives and why we think this power plan matters, some context. So we'll hear first from Elijah.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to Northwest Energy Coalition and everyone here. This is a great. I was reading the names as they came up. It's great to see so many folks from across the region. My name is Elijah Cetus. I'm an energy policy analyst with Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, or CRITFIC for short. And for folks who don't know what CRITFIC is, we are a tribal organization, a subdivision of our four member tribes, the Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Nez Perce, who each hold treaty reserved rights to fish on the Columbia River system. And the four tribes that make up CRITFIC and created CRITFIC to be a technical agency on behalf of their treaty fishing rights on the Columbia. These four tribes have been disproportionately burdened by the construction of the federal hydro system and the non-federal dams on the Columbia River. It's impacted their cultures, their resources, their village sites, their fishing sites, their treaty rights, their economic opportunity. It's had an enormously harmful effect that is still with us today. But that being said, the four tribes have been involved in energy in the Northwest for a long time as well. And the Northwest Power Act is in part a legacy of that relationship because, as was sort of touched on at the very beginning, but I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the power plan really is built in parity or is intended to be built in parity with the Fish and Wildlife Program of the Northwest Power Act. The Fish and Wildlife Program was completed earlier this year, and that program is developed through the recommendations of the fisheries managers, which includes states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and the treaty tribes who, with their reserve treaty rights, are co-managers of salmon in the Columbia Basin. And the power plan incorporates that fish and wildlife program and then has to account for it and ensure that it's protected. So throughout kind of this presentation, what I'm really going to be talking about and looking towards is building that bridge between the energy solutions we need to have reliable and adequate power that's clean and renewable in the Northwest, and the needs of the fish. And those are intimately related. Many salmon stocks are on the brink of extinction, especially our upriver stocks and our Snake River stocks. And the energy system is going to play a really important role in making sure that we're giving salmon the best chance that they have to adapt to climate change and that we're taking the actions necessary to get there. So just kind of, I like to share what a colleague told me once, which is that, the fish have adapted as much as they can to us. We have to adapt to them and we have to give them that chance to adapt. So I think this power plant has a really important role in that, and just really glad to be here. Thanks.
Great. Well, this actually is a nice segue. So I am based in Boise, Idaho, and I've been here for about 15 years doing energy work. And one of the big things in terms of the power plan that comes up here is from our water users, our agricultural interests who get concerned about, fish being sent down the river for salmon and not being used for crops in Idaho. And there's the power plan and the fish and wildlife aspect of the power plan speaks to some of that. So I'm just raising this as a tension that exists. A lot of the Idaho ideas or focus on the power plan is really more so around how the power plan makes changes to how the hydro system may operate in order to address fish flows for salmon. We think that there is a win-win solution here. To the extent the plan prioritizes energy efficiency, clean energy like solar and wind, storage, potentially some geothermal, those things all give us the energy resources we need while taking pressure off the river. And we think that could be a good future. And we start to see some of that in the plan. So I just wanted to provide that context of one of these inherent tensions that we see in the region between kind of fish for power, fish for ag, sorry, water for power, water for ag, water for fish, and how do we balance those things?
Hi, everybody. Derek Goldman. I'm the Montana Policy and Regulatory Associate with the Coalition here in Western Montana in Missoula. And as has been indicated by the previous slides, Montana is one of the 4 states that is part of under the auspices of the Power Act, particularly Western Montana, west of the divide. We are both physically and hydrologically connected to the rest of the region. We have some of the headwaters of these river systems. And then physically, we're also connected through Bonneville's transmission lines and power supply here. We have a lot of our electrical co-ops on the west side, our purchase power and transmission services from Bonneville and are affected by the plan and guided by the plan, as well as our state's largest IOU, investor-owned utility, Northwestern Energy, is also here in the region. So we're connected and we're part of it, and we really need to make sure that we work together as a region that includes Montana to address all the challenges here in the Northwest. And I'll turn it over to Fred.
Everybody, it's Fred Hewitt in Portland, the coalition staff. I'm our technical lead on the ninth plan. So if you have questions about the details, let me know. Happy to talk about it. Just a general sense of this. We've had 8 of these plans already. They're all important. This one is especially important, though, because we have a kind of an unprecedented situation with really rapid power demand growth. right now a lot from data centers, but going forward into the future with electric vehicles and decarbonization, building, switching to electric power more and more. Um, we have a really rapidly changing situation with climate and weather, as you've seen from the wildfires this summer, but also from the drought and the hydropower, which is now, this is the fourth year in a row where we've had below average hydro. That also affects, obviously, fish. And so there's a big focus on that this time. And really a big opportunity across all of the clean resources that we have available in this region that have already shown what they can do. The Power Council is the region's official authority on power planning under the Northwest Power Act, and it is a state-driven process. The council is a compact of the four Northwest states, two members each appointed by our governors. So it really has that view of the region from the broad perspective of all of our states and not just from the utilities. The visibility of this plan is going to be higher than past plans. And so our voice is really important now to push the council to, they've got a good starting point here to step up a bit on this plan. And then for BPA and the utilities to accelerate their efforts on clean energy in accordance with where the plan is going. Uh, that will be the most effective and reliable way to keep our lights on, build our economy, keep bills affordable, and protect the environment. And there is an opportunity here for all parts of the region to contribute in a fair way and get benefits. And so that's our general approach I think we'll have for the ninth plan.
Great. Now we're going to hear a little bit more from Fred about the kind of overview and the plan components.
Right. So just to provide some more context here. So what does the ninth plan include? It will, the draft ninth plan, heading toward a final plan. It looks at the region or Northwest as a whole, but it also looks at the Western region. But the focus is the power planning version, the Northwest Power Act version of the Northwest. So in particular, that area in eastern Montana is not included directly, although there are resources over there that do matter. But because the way the Northwest Power Act goes, it defines the region. The map that Ben showed before really shows what the actual footprint is for the region, for the regional planning. Um, the plan considers how the Fish and Wildlife Program that was adopted back in June by the council will change the output of the hydro system, and we call that fish ops, fish operations. That's very important because of the central importance of hydropower for our region. The plan considers a range of scenarios, different future load growth, different natural gas prices, different resource assumptions, different market conditions. They're all included in a very detailed way in the plan. The plan, very importantly, under the Power Act, sets resource goals for Bonneville, particularly on energy conservation, which has been true all along. And the plan, the Northwest Power Act, directs the council to prioritize conservation first, then renewable energy, and then other resources. The resource strategy that the council is proposing both has a long-term component out to 2046, but our focus is primarily on the action plan period. The action plan runs from 2027 to 2032, and the resource strategy for the action plan will be the focus of our discussion going forward. The long-term really matters, but this next period is really the priority. How do we meet our future needs under an increasing amount of uncertainty, and what the types and amounts of new resources that the region needs? So some key things to consider about how the plan is put together. First, we have obviously a lot of new power demand from data centers and from high tech. I always think about Micron in Boise, which is not a data center, but chip manufacturing, which is going to be expanding just amazingly rapidly, and electrification, and that includes the things that we've been pushing for in policy to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and improve the performance of the system and decrease other kinds of pollution with various forms of clean energy, renewables, storage, and customer side resources. That electrification process is also going to raise power demand quite a bit, although it's a more gradual and longer run kind of thing. The data centers are showing up right now. Climate change is changing our energy needs, and increasingly we still have a lot of very extreme weather in the winter, but the winters are getting warmer and the summers are getting hotter. Uh, and that affects hydro conditions as well in a major way. So this is a big, important thing. The council has really done excellent work to look at the climate change impact on our system. Clean energy and storage resources are now the most cost effective. We always advocated for them for all the benefits that they provide, but now they're the cheapest as well compared to other new, especially natural gas resources. And the region is going to need a lot of resources in the future. In the last several couple of decades, we've mostly had conservation energy efficiency to meet our growth, and there have been other kinds of resources as well. But in a region with about 25,000 megawatts of average demand, the region now has over 8,000 megawatts of conservation, which means that that's power plants we ended up not having to build. So we have a really solid base to build on from our conservation development under the guidance of the power plants in the past. And now we need to think about how to add other resources to conservation going forward in the future. And finally, no question, and Elijah will talk more about this later in detail, that the fish and wildlife in the river, in our Columbia River system, need better conditions to survive. And that is not just a nice thing, it is directed, demanded in the Northwest Power Act that the council find a good balance for that. So those are our main drivers.
Thank you, Fred. So yeah, the draft plan has come out and people have been reviewing it. And so we're going to hear more from Ben and Fred and Elijah about what we're seeing in that draft plan and, in this public comment period coming up, what we would focus our advocacy on, and so that we can see a final plan that's an improved version of what has come out. So I'll pass it to Ben to start us off.
All right. And just a reminder, folks, please use the chat to put any questions you have, and we'll get to those. Before we go into the priority areas, here's our overarching priorities for the whole plan, the whole campaign. So we want to really emphasize efficiency, renewables, demand response, and flexible customers. We want to maximize those things because those are a good strategy for people and costs, but also good for relieving pressure on the river. We think that strong fish protections are a baseline, a requirement for the planning. They're not a thing to trade off. They are an obligation that we have, and we should plan around them. We want to make sure that this plan helps states and utilities comply with the state clean energy laws or utility goals. So this should be in service to those existing policies. We really want to prioritize affordability, resource adequacy, making sure that the power stays on during stress times, and then reliability, that the power stays on during like extreme events, wildfires, those types of things. Those are all really important. And then we want to really mobilize people to comment. This is a plan for the region. This is a plan that affects where we live and something we rely upon. And so we all have a lot to say about it. It's a public plan, and we encourage people to weigh in. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the first priority. We have four. No, we have six. I'm going to talk about the first one. And the biggest part, one of the biggest recommendations that comes out of the power plan is what the council believes the region needs to develop by, in this case, 2032, in order to meet our expected energy needs. So some of this is directed a little more forcefully. It's not a mandate, but a little more directly towards Bonneville to acquire certain things. And other parts of this strategy are recommendations for other utilities in the region to do something that meets a similar portfolio. So, for example, Idaho Power has its own resource plan that's going to be coming up with kind of a similar thing to the power plan. And the idea is that the outputs from that plan will kind of align with the power plan. That's the goal. Here's the resources they're putting forward. So energy conservation is the biggest. So an average megawatt is a special thing in the Northwest. It's just kind of it's the flow of energy over time. But these are big numbers. We think they could be bigger. There's a potential study that was used to populate the computer program that chooses this resource mix. And we think that that potential study shows that there is more savings to be acquired, really around the shell, like building shells. So how do we help homes be more efficient? How do we get more efficient heating systems? That's going to be a great opportunity. Demand response, so asking people and paying them to turn off during peak times. We think there's a huge opportunity there. This is relatively small in the Northwest, so there's a lot of opportunity for growth in factories, businesses, homes. We think there's a lot more potential here. One of the things that's said in the plan is for BPA and others to work on how do you send the right price signals so that people know what to respond to. And we think that that's a fruitful area to work on. Voltage regulation is a really technical thing that happens at the transmission grid, where you basically like engineers get involved and they make the system work better and there's less losses. And that's all you need to know at this point. We think that this is a really fruitful area because actually nobody really notices when this happens. The thing just works better. So we think that there's more opportunity there. Big numbers for renewables. A lot of what the model is showing is wind and solar. And in particular, it's showing that if our utilities can reach the wind and solar resources that are a little bit outside of our main region, so that eastern Montana, eastern Wyoming, desert Southwest solar, there's a lot of potential. It's very affordable. It's really reliable. It's a great mix for our hydro system. So the plan recommends, and for the first time, really recommends that Bonneville get ready to go out and acquire new clean resources or help their customers. That's a really important part. Storage is batteries. It's amazing the revolution in battery storage. This plan has a lot more than other plans have had in the past because the performance is better and the economics are great. Storage can be a really great resource to address the lower Snake River dams, which are really used for flexibility and integration, and storage is a really good match for that particular resource. It can also be spread around the region. We think that there is more potential there. The plan also includes some additional natural gas. A lot of this are plants that other utilities are already planning to build in the region. Um, so it's an increment. The plan does talk about, though, and recommends that before a utility or Bonneville makes a decision about a gas plant, that they should really reassess whether a storage resource could be used in place. The numbers are super close on what makes the right decision, and we think that there's some unaccounted for costs of gas and risks that would make storage shine. So one of our recommendations is also in the plan, is that everyone should look really closely about whether gas does make sense or whether storage can actually meet that need. So this is the basic resource strategy. You'll see in the toolkit and the talking points we put forward some like kind of how to talk about these. Overall, it's generally good. We think there can be more conservation. We think there can be more with storage, and we think those two things will help displace the gas recommendations. So that's the resource strategy.
Yeah, could we go back to the previous slide because I want to provide a little context here for the conservation part. You'll notice that conservation about 1,060 megawatts, that's actually quite a bit higher than the eighth plan. It gets us back on track from where we were, well, the eighth plan, the 2021 plan officially. The sixth and seventh plans also had roughly around 1,000 megawatts of conservation or energy efficiency. To be sure that a lot of that was cheap, efficient lighting. A lot of that has already been done. But there are lots and lots more opportunities for energy efficiency conservation going forward. And this amount at least puts us back on track in a pretty good way. Now, the second thing to notice is when you compare that, look at the amounts for a lot of the other resources, particularly the renewable storage and natural gas are all larger, but conservation remains the foundation of what we're doing. And as I mentioned earlier, the Power Act says conservation has to be the the highest priority resource. We should buy as much of it as we can get up to the level of cost effectiveness, meaning what are the costs of other resources in comparison to energy efficiency and conservation. The third thing to note, and this is a new element in the proposed draft plan, is to split the conservation target between the east side and west side states. So Oregon, Washington on one side with a higher cost effectiveness limit of $150 a megawatt hour, and Idaho, Montana up to $70. And this is something that we do not support, and the region, broadly speaking, is not supporting. We think the council staff in particular wanted to support as strong a conservation target as we can, and so they proposed this as a way of kind of beefing up conservation in Oregon and Washington, especially west of the Cascades. But for a lot of reasons, we do not think that's the best way to move conservation forward. So now if you can go to the next slide. So just very simply, first, our view is that the council should continue as they always have with a single conservation target for the region as well as the other resources and not split the target, especially not on state lines. A technical appendix that the council has published shows that, in fact, having two zones would cost more and take longer for us to get the conservation that we want. So I can go into more detail if there are questions about that. But I would say that the council staff had good intentions here, but nobody outside of the council is supporting this approach. Bonneville, Public Power, Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and us, we would prefer to stay with a single conservation target. The second thing to note is that in addition to the resource strategy, 10,060 average megawatts of conservation, the plan has a lot of additional recommendations, and there's actually 52 recommendations across various areas that I won't go into here. But two important ones are part of what the council calls model conservation standards. That is a provision in the Northwest Power Act that lets the council set basically a pretty strong guidance on specific issues going forward. And the two that the council has proposed, one is for data centers, which we think is a good starting point anyway. And the second is for heat pumps, which the council's analysis doesn't show as being cost effective, but could be and need some support for developing the delivery capacity of the region, the suppliers and supply chain and the installers and all the rest of it. So those are both good, and we are going to support those. And as I mentioned, there are 50 other recommendations, which I won't go into detail here, that we'll be looking at and prioritizing some of them we think are have the biggest impact. Finally, although I'm not going to talk about this in detail, the demand response amount in the plan, 590 megawatts, is pretty good, but the council's supply curve, what they think that the region could achieve, is quite a bit larger than that, maybe 3 times as much as that for the next through the period of 2032. And demand response, along with storage, along with data center load management, those are big pieces to manage the demand growth that we're going to be seeing. So that's it for our second priority.
Okay. A quick reminder that how this process works. So this Northwest Power Planning Council staff is the one who have put out this draft plan. And now the question is whether the council members, two people from each of the four Northwest states, will adopt and approve that plan. So that's why you'll hear us sometimes say, we're going to support this recommendation because we want to make sure that it gets adopted by the council members. And sometimes you're going to say, we're going to say, hey, we recommend an improvement or a change. That's also because we want the council members to adopt. But as just an aside to kind of explain some of the terminology we're using. Okay, one of the other big parts of this plan is that the Northwest Power Planning Council is under Northwest Power Act supposed to give recommendations to Bonneville about the actions Bonneville should take within this action window, this 6-year window. And then in return, Bonneville is supposed to, under the Northwest Power Act, follow the Northwest Power Plan or explain why they're not. So this part of our priority here is what are some of the specific things the plan recommends to Bonneville? So building off what Fred was just talking about. The plan recommends that BPA achieve the energy conservation targets. But what that really means is Bonneville work with its customers to help a lot of the rural, particularly the rural co-ops and municipal utilities, help their customers conserve and achieve those savings. So that's a really important recommendation. And it's tied to the second bullet point. How can we modernize the delivery of some of the conservation programs in order to just get better, right? You can always improve your processes, you can improve your outreach, your marketing, and there's some recommendations there we'll be trumpeting. One of the things leading to the split conservation target is, and you can all imagine this, if you're in a dense urban area versus a rural area, getting savings can be different. If you can go to one building and get a whole bunch of apartments, that's different than having to go to a whole county and get a whole bunch of houses. And so in terms of modernizing, encouraging Bonneville, it's really thinking about how do we get improvements of conservation delivery in rural communities. Similar, directing Bonneville to help with the demand response programs. New for this year, and I mentioned this before, is directing Bonneville to prepare itself to acquire some large new renewables. That's not something Bonneville has typically done in the past. They've interconnected other projects, but this is a different recommendation. This is Bonneville actually going out, acquiring new wind, solar resources to meet its customers' needs. As I mentioned before, it recommends to Bonneville directly to really dive into the numbers and compare gas and storage and to see which makes sense. And then as well, assess how storage paired can be used to enhance the hydro system. So can you put some storage batteries next to a hydroelectric plant? They complement each other and then you don't need a gas plant. Those types of strategies. And then lastly, really important, really recommends to Bonneville to lead the region, continue to lead the region in expanding the transmission system. Some of the resource choices, particularly the selections of gas, were driven by the fact that the transmission system couldn't access a lower cost, clean resource in another spot. So this plan recommends that Bonneville continue and increase its activities to bolster the transmission system so that we can access these available lower cost resources in other places. So those are the key recommendations to Bonneville. We'll be trumpeting and asking others to do the same.
And now I'm going to talk about our fourth priority, which is a recommendation that we and we hope all of our public interest groups will be making for a new recommendation to be added to the draft plan when they adopt the final plan. And that would be to create a load management forum. A forum is a kind of thing the council has done before. I'll talk about that in a moment. What would the purpose of the load management forum be? It's basically a committee review process. The purpose of it would be to develop an overall regional load management strategy, to pull all the different pieces together and say, what can we do to address the big surge of demand we're seeing from data centers and eventually from electric vehicles and decarbonization? So the pieces of that are peak-oriented energy efficiency or conservation, demand response really going to scale, full scale, distributed energy resources like rooftop solar and storage, and you name it, things that reduce demand that the grid has to meet. And finally, and obviously, data center and high-tech load management. The ninth plan doesn't have anything at all for that last category. We know there's a tremendous amount available. The reason the ninth plan doesn't have it is it really hasn't happened yet around the country, and the council relies on, empirical data to set the planning approach going forward. But I think there's a recognition that data center load management has to be a very big priority in what we do going forward. So those would be the pieces of a load management strategy. The council has convened forums previously. Some of them become standing committees. The most interesting one for me was the Wind Integration Forum, which ran from about 2005 or 6 to 2012. The Wind Integration Forum was set up by the Fifth Plan, and within the first year, it produced a strategy showing how to integrate 6,000 megawatts of wind into the regional grid, which was a huge amount back then. And for a lot of people, an unthinkable amount. Well, we've done a whole lot more than that since then. The council really did a good job in that Wind Integration Forum. So a load management forum would convene the region and conduct a full assessment of all these factors. There's a lot to look at. And then propose targets, policies, programs, and an implementation roadmap. So I think we have a pretty clear idea of what the ask will be for that. And that's it for priority 4. Priority 5, and we've talked about this already, is being much more explicit about connecting salmon and energy as required by the Power Act, and as put forth in the Fish and Wildlife Program, which has one key area that's not yet where it needs to be, but broadly speaking is a pretty darn good approach for addressing the impacts of the hydro system on fish and wildlife that, as required by the Power Act, took a lot of input from the tribes and state agencies and the broad public and was adopted by the council back in June. And the broad point we've been making is that a strong ninth plan will support the Fish and Wildlife Program by diversifying our clean energy resource mix, and then that allows providing more flows for fish. So now I'll turn it over to Elijah to talk more about that.
Thank you, Fred. And as you all were talking, I realized that some of what I've prepared here is going to be what you just said. But I hope that it'll add a little bit of color commentary and help folks kind of connect the dots as they're thinking about providing comments and thinking about the needs of fish in this system. I do promise to everyone I did not read their slides before I made these, so I think it tells you that we're on the right track, actually. But so I want to just talk about some principles for how we've been looking at the ninth power plan and how it's been developed, and some of the broader takeaways that we have as tribal fish managers and policy analysts. Um, Next slide. So the first is that the Northwest Power Act establishes parity between energy needs and ecosystem function. And you can see that in the draft plan. The council staff put together a couple different sections where they discuss the measures that were developed in the Fish and Wildlife Program, and they point a little bit towards how they were adopted into the power plan. We still have some questions there around, the recommended scenario that has been shown, with the different resources and the way that that relates to the Fish and Wildlife Program scenarios, because there's not one static fish management approach. And what the fish will need over time is going to change under different scenarios with climate change. So I think the important thing here is that there are elements of this act that are really important and highly relevant to the era that we're coming into of pretty radical energy growth in the region, and the renewable energy transition. You know, integrating the Fish and Wildlife Program, the needs for spill, the need to protect habitats of both the main stem and the tributaries, and the need to provide that adaptive management in the region. Integrating that with how we plan for energy is actually really hard. The tribes have been involved in this process in past power plans, and one of the things that we see sometimes is that the cost effectiveness measure of resources takes priority over the parity principle, or it takes priority over the actual resource stack that's embedded in the Northwest Power Act, that says you need to acquire conservation and efficiency first, what we might think of as load management if we add in other strategies, and then renewables and then fossil fuels. And that was the stack that was created in the 1980s. But when you come into issues of cost, resource constraints, and things like that, it's easy to put the fish on the back burner. But I think, what I hope that you all will take away is that the measures that are good for fish are actually good for communities as well, and for resilience, climate adaptation, and really a just energy future too. So next slide, please. So the second takeaway is that the hydro system is not a pliant battery. It has been treated like a battery for the Northwest for a long time. Ben mentioned the way in which the lower Snake River dams provide a lot of that flexibility to the system that storage resources like batteries today can support and provide. Um, but increasingly, and really, as has always been the case, tribal treaty rights and then also Endangered Species Act mandated flows really have to be protected. They're not always protected. So during emergencies or times when the grid is experiencing some changes, it doesn't have to be a full multi-day blackout. Those flow protections can actually be paused. And when those flow protections are paused, what happens physically in the system is that juvenile salmon can be sent through the turbines. And in 2001, the most dramatic example of this for the region was when the market changes in California, think Enron, came up to the Northwest, and there was a crisis in the market. Prices skyrocketed, and the hydro system did not, the flows for fish stopped for multiple days, and that had a big impact on the fishery. Um, Climate change is driving more low and erratic flow years. So what that means is that the cost of to the system is going to increase. We know from studies that CRITFIC's done and those in the region that low flow hydro years have a bigger impact on cost and resource adequacy than flows for fish. So that's already happening. So we're losing our battery that way. And then, we need to build an adaptive management system for our hydro system, or we're going to see a regional lose-lose. If we're dependent too much on the hydro system, then it creates risks for resource adequacy. It also creates a risk for fish. So we really think we need to start adapting now to get ahead of that curve. And I think there's elements of this ninth power plan that have really, positive steps, including the emphasis on storage resource and what Ben just mentioned about, really kind of saying before you go get gas, you need to go look at what's possible with storage. Um, and then again, hydro flexibility shouldn't be assumed in some of these resource models. So, if the cost of a resource appears, for example, storage to be higher, I think it's important to ask how much are we assuming a ready, available hydro system flows for that resource. I think council's staff have done a good job so far, but I think this is still an area where we need to keep asking those questions because it's changing over time. Next slide, please. The region needs to build flexibility around the hydro system to protect fish, communities, and to integrate renewables. Um, And I think that points back to some of the analysis that Fred gave around, the Pacific Northwest has been a historic leader in energy efficiency, but there's less potential now. And so we need to find ways to do comprehensive load management, to really build a buffer around the flows that fish need and to allow the hydro system to be treated more like a river, which is essentially what we need for long-term fish adaptation survival. Um, Interconnection is a big question. I think one in the past power plan, one issue that we saw was that the hydro system was being used in models to integrate variable renewable resources. Batteries go a long way in helping that. It's an issue if you rely on the hydro system for daily fluctuations to meet alternative, power supply, because though again, those flows can impact the fish on a daily basis and an hourly basis, as well as a seasonal basis. Um, we see in the council's models that demand response becomes necessary when resources are strained. So again, I think that points to the need for the comprehensive load management that Fred's talking about, and for that to take a priority position in the plan. What we see is that if you can't build a gas plant, or if you can't build enough transmission, what's going to happen is demand will have to adapt to that constrained system. What we don't want to see is a very constrained grid that then leads to a grid crisis during a power outage, during extreme weather, or that leads to systematic pressure on the hydro system that doesn't allow the fish managers to come in and say, hey, we need more flows because there's a drought. Um, and then I think, this last point is very important, which is that data center demands pose some acute threats to reliability, flows for fish, and community health when we're talking about both a multi-day blackout, but also data centers, just kicking on fossil fuel backup generation resources during an emergency. So that's a hard problem, but there's fortunately some really positive trends, and we think that by managing data center demand, the region could go a long way to build some of that flexibility into the system, and that would include curtailment as well as managing peak load times, like Fred mentioned. So next slide, please. And this is just more of kind of what I've been saying. One point on energy efficiency is that, it's really critical right now for low income and tribal communities. When we talk about energy efficiency, the easiest stuff has been reached. You hear that a lot. I think it's important to think about who hasn't been reached, and picture, an uninsulated home during a record-breaking heat wave and the kind of energy costs that come if you have an air conditioning, or the actual just risk to your health that you experience if you don't have an air conditioning, for example. And so efficiency really does help improve people's quality of life. And there's a big gap in low income communities, tribal communities, rural communities. So that's one where, again, the cost may go up, but there's benefits, real human benefits to investing in efficiency. Um, as has been mentioned, demand response potential is very large. I want to note that this has also been used in the past. So when Bonneville was supplying power to um, a lot of you know aluminum smelters, they actually had what we might consider a kind of demand response program, in that they could curtail the power from those smelters in times when the grid was really constrained. So just a point there that we can think pretty creatively. Again, that point on reducing data center loads, this is really critical, and there's been great studies by a group called Sylvan Energy Analytics that showed that, we could reduce the power needs by something like 3 gigawatts if we curtailed data centers during emergency times. There's also big potential during daily, hourly peak times, as Fred mentioned. So we want to see that really explored more in this plan, and actually included in that model conservation standard that the council has adopted. The efficiency potential is there, and we've done a study on that, but I think really that big area is going to be around some of that reducing peak time. And then, yeah, I think just this point on, we need a lot more batteries. Again, if we treat the hydro system as a battery, we need to build other batteries instead. It's kind of simple. Next slide, please. And then this is really just, I think, agreeing with what Fred and others have said. We really want to see the Power Council and Bonneville take the lead here. Invest in storage and new responsible generation. Look to California at how much storage California has interconnected and what they've been able to do on their grid because of that. Really think about how you manage demand. I know that we've missed some opportunities with Bonneville in particular around demand management with their customers. Um, but I think that that needs to be on the table. So support that group that's been recommended for demand management. Easing interconnection queues to get renewables resources on the grid. This is really important, especially to tribal energy utilities as well as others. It's very difficult to get a renewable energy project interconnected onto Bonneville's system. I'm not sure yet where we might talk about that more in the plan, but I was optimistic to hear that point about, obligating Bonneville to prepare for renewables. And then, yeah, investing in thoughtful transmission upgrades and expansion, really just prioritizing where are the best places for our grid for transmission, um, and taking it from a leadership standpoint at a regional level and not just waiting for developers to appear and sort of draw lines on maps. Um, and then I think, this is a question that I have, but really with Bonneville potentially joining this day ahead market, and then another market opening, and this question about seams in the region, and then also emerging technologies. I think we're going to need to have a lot more discussion as this plan gets developed because it's so dynamic. And so just would hope that this plan, I think, really emphasizes that and brings people back to the table as it's being implemented over the next few years as well. Um, yeah, and then I'll just end there and say, we have a lot of work to do for salmon recovery, but they're really, really resilient fish. We can take out the lower four Snake River dams. We can operate our hydro system more like a river. It's very possible. And really we can balance that and have a great energy future. Thanks.
Thanks, Elijah. And this is Derek again. And I'm just going to go over, what's happening moving forward in terms of the opportunities for public engagement and the next steps for NWEC here in helping with engagement. And then we'll go into Q&A. So so the plan was released about 10 days ago, and we have a 60-day public comment period. As Fred pointed out, there's going to be at least uh, one public meeting in each state, and we don't have some of those announced yet or scheduled, but we do have some. We have the Power Council's meeting that's coming up in Portland, their regular monthly meeting. It sounds like the second day of that is going to be a public hearing specific to the plan. And stay tuned for more information on that. And then there's one scheduled, likely at their monthly meeting in Idaho, probably follow the same format with a day dedicated to plan comments. At NWEC here, we plan on, in the next couple weeks, we'll be releasing a public comment toolkit to help you engage, both for meetings and on technical comments around the plan. And as we get more hearing dates scheduled, like I said, we don't have Washington or Montana yet. We will share those as soon as they come out. And then we'll be working on our own technical comment that folks can sign on to. So look for more information about that. Look for our own public comment toolkit. Plan on attending a public hearing. And you can also review the plan online and submit a written comment. And I just posted a link for that in the chat here. But it'll be really important to get folks out to these public meetings where the council members and the staff will be. And that is pretty much, I will turn it back over to, I think Ellie was going to facilitate getting some of the questions. And thanks everybody for who for putting questions in the chat. And we'll start going through those and trying to get some of those answered. So I'll turn it back over to Ellie.
Yeah, so we have lots of great questions. Thanks for that. And feel free to keep adding them in the chat while we go through this process. I'm going to read them out and have the panelists decide who wants to answer. So I'm going to start with a few that are kind of just big picture, a little bit more about the process overall. So we have one that is, what are the council's options for a decision? Can they reject the plan? Can they adopt parts of the plan? And what happens if the council doesn't vote to adopt?
Yeah, I can take that. So the Northwest Power Act describes the process. Remember, there are two members for each state. So there's 8 members. The Power Act requires approval of the plan either to be 5 members with one, at least one from each state, or 6 members, meaning that one state's 2 members can't block the plan. And but the practical reality is the council has always effectively voted 8-0, or it's kept working on it until they can get to 8-0. If the council split and didn't approve the plan, the Power Act's not very clear about this, but I think they would have to keep trying until they can actually adopt one. That's broadly speaking how it works.
Great. And then we have another question about how enforceable the plan is. So is it just recommendations for BPA or other providers that they could ignore? Or could there be legal or legislative consequences for diverging from it?
Uh, this one is going to be a little bit unsatisfying for folks. It's not the Power Council can't direct Bonneville Power Administration. They put out a plan and recommendations, and then the law is that Bonneville is supposed to align with those or explain otherwise. So it's not like it's like a power of persuasion. Ideally, the plan is so good, so robust, so complete that it's hard to go against it. That's what we're going for. Um, but it doesn't like it's not a directive. It's more of a persuasive document.
Yeah, and just to add, and I'm not the attorney here, and Ben is that the reason, underlying reason, is that a state, in this case, a state compact of state agencies, cannot direct a federal agency what to do. It's kind of a fundamental constitutional thing, federalism. But the Power Act provides that that Bonneville is supposed to follow the plan or explain why it's not. That we've really never gotten quite to that level. What this does is in international relations, this is called constructive ambiguity, meaning that there's going to be a complicated dance between the council and Bonneville over how much Bonneville does stay on track with what the plan directs and what's in the plan. But that's not a bad thing because over the years, Bonneville has done a pretty good job of staying on track. What we're concerned about now is that both that Bonneville achieve, and Bonneville doesn't deliver the conservation, for example, that's up to their uh, preference customer utilities. So that's another aspect of all this is how Bonneville coordinates. Uh, and jumping ahead, if I might, to a different question, Bonneville can acquire other resources besides conservation. They have tried to do so in the past with bad results. They tried to build a gas power plant 30 years ago, which resulted in canceling the plant and paying out a big penalty. But the council does have Bonneville does have the ability to buy new renewable or any kind of resource, but we would prefer renewable resources and in some cases, they have to go back to the council and get that reviewed. But yes, the Bonneville does have the ability to buy new stuff when they need to.
Great. And then maybe kind of just continuing on that, there's a question. My understanding is that BPA's provider of choice contract limits how much non-BPA energy their utility customers can purchase. Could that be a constraint on delivering parts of this plan?
I will say we were very involved in the provider of choice process and have a lot of concerns about how it landed. Uh, my opinion on this, others may not share this exactly, is that it kind of handcuffs the utilities in a lot of ways. I can see why Bonneville wanted to follow that because it's very complicated managing a system for, roughly speaking, 140 utility customers, 135, 140, however you count it, all different kinds, all over the region. That they wanted more uniformity in how things were being done. But there are provisions in the provider. Let me back up and say, provider of choice is kind of a brand name for long-term contracts under the Northwest Power Act that extend for up to 20 years. And the provider of choice contracts, quote unquote, that name, those new long-term contracts, which have now been signed, will go from October of 2028 until September of 2044. So that's 16 years. The current long-term contracts expire in September of 28, so just about 2 years from now. The provider of choice contracts, in my opinion and in our opinion, don't provide enough flexibility for customer utilities to do their own resources, and there's going to be issues with that, but they don't prohibit it. I think we're going to have to be creative in the region about how to make sure that our public power utilities are able to get the resources that they need. And that may require some additional work with Bonneville on how to interpret the contracts.
I'll add that the portion of the resource strategy that directs or recommends that Bonneville prepare to acquire new resources is tied to Bonneville's obligation to provide to meet its provider of choice contract obligations. So they're integrated. They're not done in absence. The resource recommendation is built upon what Bonneville has said they're going to provide to their customers.
So we have another question here about a little bit of strategy in influencing the plan. What role do BPA customers play in shaping the plan? So could advocacy include urging public utilities to support the priorities and comments presented today?
Yeah, the here's a anecdote. We talked about the split conservation target between the east side and the west side. A lot of the entities pushing back against that were public power from the east side of the system, who were saying that they really value energy efficiency programs for their customers. They see it as a customer service thing, and they wanted to make sure that the plan, you know, didn't recommend scaling back what they were doing, that they actually wanted to do more. So, public power is involved in setting up the plan and influencing what's in there, both, for their own customers and stuff. But they're also influential to the council members. So definitely part of the strategy is trying to look at what the public power customers are saying and try to trumpet those things that we agree with and provide, a counterbalance to stuff that we don't. But they are influential for sure.
Yeah, if I could
Yeah, if
just
I could build on that a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, Elijah.
we'll probably say similar, but we do know that Bonneville really listens to its customers, to the utilities. Doesn't always agree with them or do what they want, but it does. That is a meaningful way to reach Bonneville, and also, the discourse right now is so much. Especially around fish needs, we're hearing a lot from some of the public utility districts and public power associations, this idea that, if we spill for fish, if we provide any water for them, then we're going to, ruin the region's climate plans and create multi-day blackouts and et cetera. So they're really blaming the fish spills. And I think, what I hope that folks can take away, especially customers in the publics, is that there is a way to have a reliable system and provide for fish needs, and it's this plan is actually, I think, a pretty good starting point. And and there's a lot more that could be done. And we've been working on this for a long time, and we should go further. And really we can. It's really not a question of whether we can. And so just adding that point to it because I think I think it's just important, to say that. And the other thing I'll say is that really emphasizing data centers curtailment could be part of that story, in the sense of saying, hey, before we experience a blackout, are we turning off the load to our largest customers? Are you managing that load first? And that's a question for the publics and for Bonneville, who may be, who may have very large data centers in their system already. And I think kind of raising that is really important. Um,
A couple of quick points if I can add on. First, terminology. This is always an issue. In the Northwest Power Act, the word customer means the preference utilities, the public power and federal agencies and tribal utilities that BPA provides firm power to. The customer word is kind of a little bit overloaded because we are all customers, right? Yeah, we are. But in the Power Act, we are consumers. So just to be aware of that, I don't think you have to worry about it too much. The second point goes back to the specific issue on conservation and that split target that the council is proposing. One of the key things that would do is reduce the cost effectiveness level for Idaho, Montana utilities. And the most direct effect of that would be to pull some important residential weatherization measures off the table to reduce the ability of public power utilities on the east side, munis and co-ops, to deliver residential weatherization. So they're very concerned about that, rightfully so. The final thing to say is back to the original question is, yes, to the extent that we can get utilities to be on board with the ninth plan, if you have contacts with your local public power utility and can encourage them to do that, we really would like that because we want to get broad public support for a really big effort coming forward to deal with the load demand surge that we're seeing and to emphasize that the clean energy acceleration that the ninth plan does a pretty good job on is the most secure path forward on that and the cheapest. I mean, speaking in terms of what utilities really have to worry about, affordability for customers and the capability that they have to deliver their part. Those are the things that are going to really matter to them a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So we have a couple questions about how the plan interacts with state legislation and also investor-owned utility planning. So I'm going to lump these together. Do we have a sense about how the resource strategy might change if Washington's UTC were to more fully embrace performance-based regulation? And how does a company plan like Puget Sound Energies interact with the ninth power plan, or does it not? So maybe people could just talk in kind of broad strokes about how it interacts with state legislation and investor-owned utilities, and you could speak to those questions as well.
Yeah, so couple things to say. The plan is supposed to incorporate state level mandates and develop a plan that enables people to meet them. And so it's, this is a federal law and like a federally set up thing, so it can't change the state laws. So the way it's structured is the federal plan is supposed to, respect those state laws and enable compliance. So that's the interaction there. And then another piece of this is that we have different types of utilities. You have public power, which are mostly Bonneville Power customers. And the power plan's kind of really operating in that universe. And then we have our investor-owned utilities, like say Puget Sound Energy or Vista or Idaho Power. They are, they're supposed to kind of like align with the plan, but the plan is really much looser on directing them. Those investor-owned utilities are regulated by the state, that Public Utilities Commission. So there's couple layers here. You have the federal plan that's supposed to help align with state law, help others comply. It really focuses on what Bonneville and public power should do. and it kind of sets an example for investor owns. So last part of this question I'll answer for now is there's a very specific thing happening for the investor owns in Washington, where they might adopt a new regulatory paradigm called performance-based rate making that encourages utilities to like do more performance-based things. That's really the they're like different it's like a sequence of events. The plan says, here's what we think you should do. And then utilities go and do those things. And then the regulatory environment that they're in kind of influences how they'll do their part implementing the plan. So this is a tough question, so I'm rambling a little bit here. And what my final answer is going to be this, it's like a sequencing thing. The plan sets the stage, recommendations, direction, and then how each individual implements their bit will be influenced by the state. Hopefully that works for
I'll
folks.
just
That's
add,
a good
yeah,
question, and I hope I came up with a clear answer.
just to add very quickly, the council's professional staff has put together the best planning apparatus we've got in terms of the thoroughness of the analysis that they do, the sophistication of the models, and the council's work as a whole provides a lot of value, for example, in utility IRPs, which a lot of us are involved in. A quiet influence, but it's actually pretty powerful. The council has made big impacts on resource adequacy, on including climate change in utility planning, and on just the nuts and bolts of the resources that are out there that we could use. So all of that does have an influence on the non-public power side of the investor-owned side as well.
Great. Well, the rest of the questions have been answered in the chat. So if there are there any last comments from the panelists that folks want to share? Oh, here's one more question. Does the ninth
Yeah.
plan assess the recent uncertainty surrounding the Columbia River Treaty? While Canada isn't part of the PNW electric grid, it does control how some of the Columbia's hydro resources contribute to generation.
I've been very involved in that for a long time. And what I will say is, yes, the plan incorporates the current arrangements. I will put that term out there on the Columbia River Treaty. The very brief background for those who don't know about it. The Columbia River Treaty went into force in 1964 and sets up how the use of Canadian hydropower and storage and U.S. side, Northwest side hydropower and storage, how they work together. Because we have a connected river system where the upstream storage in the Canadian side is very important for operations south of the border. And the 1964 treaty had provisions that expired in 2024. There was a long effort to modernize the treaty. The proposal went forward. A new administration took control in DC, and things are kind of in limbo right now. But there have been some important changes to the the deal on how the U.S. side helps pay for the Canadian storage. I won't go into the details here, but all of that, as it currently stands, those arrangements are fully represented in the plan. Where this all goes is dependent on what happens with two federal governments going forward.
Yeah.
Thanks. So,
Also,
oh yeah, Elijah, you want to add?
I just wanted to add on that point there is a new flood risk management group that is coming out of the Fish and Wildlife program. And then, there's also potentially larger flows available for fish in the ecosystem function pillar of the treaty, which was not adopted, but is there's a new joint ecosystem board proposal that was part of that uh, treaty. So that could potentially impact flows in cold water.
So we
Ellie,
have, oh. One more
Just
question that I think will be a good one to end on, which says, a comment earlier suggested that attending hearings and providing comment in person was especially important. In your view, is an in-person participation more impactful than submitting written feedback? So maybe we can just say a little pitch for how
yeah,
folks engage, and then we can wrap up from there.
this was just the last comment I was thinking of too, Ellie. One way to think of this is that a person hearing your comment can recognize the amount of effort that you put into making that comment, and they respect people who put in a lot of effort. I mean, they respect everybody. But if you show up at a meeting and you say something in person, typically a decision maker says that person really cares about this because they're taking time out of their lives to attend and do something that takes a little bit heavier lift on your end. So to the extent you can make it to a public meeting, that's a real strong showing that this is really an important thing to you and that the decision maker should really listen. Um, we all know that people are busy. And so it's also very important to put in written comments. Those are part of the record. They are received and thought of, incorporated. So I would leave it that way. Definitely write in. But if you can show up, a decision maker is going to see that as this means a lot to this person. I really want to hear from them. This is clearly an important issue.
If I
And
might
it's kind of
add,
fun too. Like
yes,
you
in
get to be
person,
around like your friends and your
yeah.
allies and make it kind of fun and like have a little community around it. We think that's important too.
Yeah, a couple additional notes. The in-person comments really have the most impact on the council members. The written comments are really important for the written record. And by the way, the council has to respond to all of it in writing under their procedures. If you can attend in person at one of the hearings, that's great. We know that there's a lot of concern that the council is not going to have an in-person hearing in Boise. I kind of doubt that they're going to change their mind on that. But given that, there's also going to be an option. I think what the way the council is likely to handle this is anybody in the room will be given priority to speak at those in-person hearings, but then they'll also allow for online comments as well. And then, as I mentioned before, there will be one online only webinar, probably near the end of the process. So, but the in-person comments are a demonstration of interest from our community. You don't have to be a technical expert on all these issues. I think the most important thing is to show up and say it the way you really feel it. And they will probably allow, let's say, they may allow more, but my guess is they'll allow 3 minutes per comment, which is enough time to say some good things.
Great. Well, yeah, big thank you to all of our speakers for all your time, reading through the plan and sharing your insights. And just a reminder that I'll share a few links. There's the form where you can start submitting written comment now. So if we'll be sending out the slides and the recording, and feel free to start submitting those comments. And then there's also a link to our website where we have more information, and we'll be posting when we hear about the hearing dates and when we have our comment toolkit ready. So you can also wait for that comment toolkit and share comments with our kind of technical recommendations as well. So yeah, we'll be sending out the slides and the recording after this. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Great attendance.